sky hung low over Boston, a slate-colored ceiling cracked with streaks of ice. Snow drifted steadily, silent and relentless, settling in soft layers on the winding gravel paths of Glenridge Cemetery among the ancient oaks and stone angels. Dusted white, a sleek black Mercedes glided to stop at the curb. The door opened with a mechanical hiss, and Thaddeus Gideon emerged, his leather gloves creaking as he clutched a folded newspaper. He looked every inch the man he had always been: polished, powerful, cloaked in wealth that had only thickened with age. His silver hair was immaculately swept back, the collar of his cashmere coat raised against the bite of winter air. But beneath the practiced stoicism, something quivered in his jaw. He had read the obituary by accident, tucked between finance columns and stock forecasts. A single sentence had stopped his world. Alone Maureen Gideon, 45, devoted mother, loyal friend, gone too soon. She had kept his name. It had been 20 years since he'd last seen her, 20 years since she stood at the edge of his study, pregnant and pleading, and he, certain of his own righteousness, had dismissed her with a check and a threat. And now she was gone. The finality of it pressed into his chest like frostbite. He followed the printed directions, boots crunching softly on frozen gravel, until he reached the row where the headstones stood like weary sentinels. As he turned the final corner, the breath caught in his throat. Someone was already there. A boy, no. A young man was kneeling before Alone's grave. He wore a threadbare coat, his shoulders hunched against the cold, dark curls weighed down by melting snow. In his gloved hands, he held a folded piece of paper, worn at the edges. His head was bowed, trembling slightly as he whispered something too soft to hear. And then he broke. A sob cracked out of him, raw and desperate, as he pressed his forehead against the gravestone like he couldn't bear to let her go. Thaddeus froze, the world around him falling mute. There was something about the boy, his frame, the way his chin curved like a blade, the sharp arch of his brows, and the eyes. Even from a distance, even through tears, Thaddeus saw them, Alone's eyes. But no, there was something else in them, something painfully familiar. His own. A gust of wind sliced through him, but it wasn't the cold that made him stagger back. His grip on the newspaper slipped. The pages fluttered to the ground like fallen feathers. He took 2 steps backward, then ducked behind the nearest statue of mossy, lichen-covered cherub shielding a cracked stone cross. He leaned against it, heart pounding in his chest like it hadn't in years. The bitter wind could not compare to the storm rising in him now. The boy stayed by the grave, murmuring a final goodbye as if it were a prayer meant only for the dead. And Thaddeus Gideon, once certain of every decision he'd ever made, stood in the shadows, not ready to face the truth he had buried for 2 decades. Now kneeling in the snow before him, weeping for the woman he had cast away. The boy left just after sunset, his figure swallowed by the dusky snow as if the city itself couldn't bear to watch him go. Thaddeus remained hidden behind the statue long after, breath fogging in the cold. His legs ached. His pride did too. He hadn't wept at his father's funeral, not when he won his first hostile takeover, not even when he lost Alone. But something inside him now, something old and rusted shut, was beginning to creak open. He returned to the grave when he was sure. He was alone. The headstone was simple, almost insultingly so. Alone Maureen Gideon. No mention of a wife, no mention of him. Below her name, carved with quiet reverence, were the words, "She loved without measure. She forgave without permission." Thaddeus felt something ripple through him, violent and invisible. She forgave, even after what he did. He knelt. For the first time in decades, Thaddeus Gideon knelt for something other than profit or prestige. His gloved hand hovered inches above the cold stone, trembling with everything he hadn't said. The wind howled. Somewhere in the trees, a crow shrieked and took flight. 2 nights later, he was parked in the same spot outside the cemetery, this time with intent. The young man arrived just after 6. No umbrella, no gloves. He moved like someone who'd grown used to weathering the world's indifference. Thaddeus followed him this time, slowly, at a distance. Guilt burned in his throat, but curiosity and dread gripped tighter. The trail led him to a brick apartment building in Dorchester. Modest, clean, but aged. The lobby smelled like old carpet and laundry. Thaddeus stood at the far end of the hallway, just out of sight, watching the boy unlock a unit on the 3rd floor. The door opened, and warm yellow light spilled out. Inside, music floated soft. Piano, hesitant but haunting. Alone's son played the piano. "My son," He hadn't earned the question. Not yet. But it followed him as he returned home that night, trailing behind his Bentley. Like a ghost with a last name, he couldn't sleep. Not with the echoes of those notes. Not with the memory of Alone's face the night she'd said, "This is our miracle." And he had laughed at her, called her a liar. And worse, he poured bourbon into a cut glass tumbler the same way he had 20 years ago. The fire crackled, but the warmth didn't reach him. He sat in the vast silence of his penthouse, surrounded by things: art, crystal, leather, but none of them had a pulse. None of them cried at Alone's grave. He went into his study. He hadn't stepped foot in it since the day she left. Dust clung to everything like shame. He approached the bookshelf and, almost without thought, opened the old safe hidden behind the Monet dot. Inside, still wrapped in brittle parchment, was the torn check. He had forgotten it was there. She had ripped it in half-jagged, violent edges and left it behind like a warning or a testament. Beneath it lay something else. A sealed envelope he had never seen before, yellowed with time, addressed in Alone's handwriting. "If you ever find this, Thaddeus, then you finally stopped running from the truth, and you're ready to meet him." His fingers went numb. He didn't open it. Couldn't. Not yet. The next morning, Thaddeus returned to the apartment in Dorchester. But this time, he brought something with him, something heavier than guilt, more persistent than pride, intention. He didn't knock. Not immediately. He stood there in the hallway, outside apartment 3B, hand frozen in the air. Inside, he could hear the music again, a soft melody drifting through the door, the same piece, haunting. Familiar. No dash identical. It was a song Alone used to play, late, at night, when he thought she was just keeping herself occupied, a song she wrote, for him. He knocked. Footsteps approached. The door opened. The boy stood there, brows furrowed slightly at the sight of a stranger in a tailored coat standing stiffly in the hall. "Can I help you?" the boy asked. Thaddeus looked at him, really looked in, every carefully constructed. The fence he had spent decades building collapsed in the silence. "My name is Thaddeus Gideon," he said quietly, voice hoarse. "I knew your mother a long time ago." The boy's eyes sharpened. A name like Gideon carried weight and blood. Something unreadable passed across the young man's face. Not quite recognition, not yet, but maybe the first breath of it. And then, behind him, on the small entryway table, Thaddeus saw a photo frame. It held a picture of Alone smiling, radiant tan, the boy at around age 10, sitting in her lap, holding a toy keyboard. Her hand rested on his chest, protective, proud. Beneath the photo, written in her handwriting, "To Eli, my heart, my music, my miracle." Thaddeus staggered back like he'd been struck. Miracle. He swallowed something sharp. The boy was still, watching him, confused but polite. "Would you like to come in?" he asked, after a pause. Thaddeus nodded, stepped through the door. He didn't realize until much later that his shoes had left wet prints on the hardwood. That was the first trace he ever left in his son's life. The apartment smelled of cinnamon, wax, and old wood. Books lined the shelves in the smashed rows, and a crooked lamp cast a warm amber hue across the small living room. There was no sign of wealth, but the place radiated something rare: safety. "Home." Eli gestured toward the couch without saying much, and Thaddeus obeyed, brushing snow from his sleeves before lowering himself into the fabric that was already warm from life. The boy sat across from him, close enough for Thaddeus to study the curve of his cheekbone, the way his fingers twitched restlessly against the armrest beyond his fingers. Alone's fingers. No, his fingers. But he didn't dare say it. Not yet. Instead, Thaddeus cleared his throat. "You play very well, thanks." Ellie's voice was guarded, but not cold. It was her favorite piece. She said it reminded her of someone she used to know, someone she loved once. The words stung harder than any accusation. Thaddeus straightened. "She ever say who?" Eli gave a ghost of a smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "She never talked much about the past. Said it was made of glass, beautiful when untouched, dangerous when you try to pick up the pieces." The silence thickened between them. Thaddeus reached into the inner pocket of his coat and withdrew the envelope. His fingers hovered over it. The weight of the unopened truth made his chest feel hollow. "I found this," he said quietly, "yesterday. It was addressed to me, from your mother." Eli blinked, his jaw tightening. "Did she write you before she passed?" "She didn't send it," Thaddeus replied. "She left it." Buried it in a safe I haven't opened in 20 years. The boy's eyes darkened with something like understanding. So you really did know her? Thaddeus hesitated. She was my wife. Eli leaned back slowly, as if someone had knocked the breath from his lungs. Wait, what? I was her husband. I knew her before you were born. I thought I couldn't have children. I believed it. So when she told me she was pregnant, his voice broke for a fraction of a second. I didn't believe her. I thought, God help me, I thought she had betrayed me. So I made her leave. Eli stood now, not in rage but in silent, stunned disbelief. He paced once, twice, then turned on Thaddeus. So you're saying you're my father? Thaddeus didn't answer with words. Instead, he opened the envelope and handed over Alone's letter. It trembled slightly in Ellie's hands as he unfolded it. My sweet Eli, if you're reading this, it means the past has come back in the form I always prayed it would, not in pain, but in pursuit of truth. Thaddeus Gideon was your father by blood, yes, but I never wanted you to grow up shaped by a man's shadow. I wanted you to grow from my life first. He didn't believe in miracles, but you are one. I told him that night when he ripped my heart in two that this was not science, not logic. You were something greater, and one day he would know if he is there now. Beside you then, he finally does. Ellie's hands trembled. He reread it twice, then lowered the letter. For a long time, neither spoke. When Eli finally met Thaddeus's eyes again, they were wet not with the tears of a boy, but with the fury and ache of a man who had spent his life wondering why he'd never known where he came from all these years. Eli said, voice thin. She never said a word, not one. She protected you, Thaddeus said, from me. You don't even deny it. I can't. Thaddeus whispered. I was everything she said I was. Arrogant, cruel, too proud to ask why, too afraid to believe. Eli looked away, swallowing hard. You don't get to walk in here and suddenly become a father. I know. You can't just sit there and think one letter changes anything. I know. Ellie's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. But you're still here. I am. Why now? Thaddeus didn't look away, because I was wrong. And for the first time in my life, I want to be right about something, anything. A knock broke the tension. Eli glanced toward the door. That's probably May, he said, moving to answer it as he stepped out of view. Thaddeus turned to the photo frame again, Alone smiling, Eli laughing. A home built from scraps of love she salvaged from ruin. A boy raised in a kingdom of music and silence. And somehow, in that silence, a truth had grown roots. In the hallway beyond the door, a voice greeted Eli with a laugh, then a pause. Hey, the girl said, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Eli murmured something Thaddeus couldn't hear. And then, to his surprise, the boy came back. He didn't sit, but he stood in the doorway, arms folded, letter still in hand. I have one condition, Eli said. Thaddeus rose. Anything. I want to know everything, the truth, not just about what happened with her, but about you, about who you really are. Thaddeus inhaled slowly. For a man who had spent his life commanding boardrooms and building empires, it was the first time he'd ever felt like the one being interviewed, and the stakes had never been higher. Then I'll tell you, he said, everything. But even as the words left his mouth, he couldn't have known the truth waiting to surface next, the one he didn't even know existed. The one Alone had taken with her to the grave. The lie that changed everything hadn't come from Alone. It had come from his own blood. The city had quieted into its evening hush by the time Eli returned to his room. He didn't say much after Thaddeus left. He didn't need to. The air between them had shifted, no longer frozen with confusion, but simmering with questions still. Too hot to touch, he locked the door behind him, then turned toward the corner of his room where her old cedar chest sat. He hadn't opened it in weeks, maybe months, not since the hospital, not since the night she clutched his hand one last time and whispered, one day, you need to know everything. When that day comes, start here. He lifted the lid slowly. Inside was a velvet box of old sheet music, a pair of mittens she'd wear upon during the worst winter of his childhood, a faded Polaroid of her as a teenager, and at the very bottom, nestled beneath a bundle of letters he'd already read 100 times, was a slim black envelope. No postmark, no name, only a tiny wax seal pressed into the flap. Eli hesitated. The envelope was new, the paper unyellowed, She must have placed it there recently, sometime between chemo rounds and lullabies. Somewhere between hope and goodbye. He broke the seal. Inside was a single folded sheet. Her handwriting filled the page in tight, looping lines. But this time, it wasn't addressed to him. To Thaddeus, if you found this, it means Eli has let you in, or you forced your way through a door he was never obligated to open. Either way, you deserve to know the final truth. The one that even I couldn't say out loud. You weren't sterile, Thaddeus. You never were. Ellie's eyes widened. You remember that day, the appointments, the specialists, the files, the final report that shattered everything. It was forged, not by me, by your mother. The room suddenly felt too small, the floor too thin beneath him. She knew you were slipping away from her, that I was the only thing you couldn't control through numbers, lawyers, and legacy. So she controlled the only thing that mattered more to you than me or bloodline. She bribed Dr. Ellsworth, paid him to alter the results, told him it was for your own good, told him no one could ever know. And you believed it, because she was your mother, because you trusted her, and not me. By the time I discovered the truth years later, it didn't matter. You were gone, and I was raising a son who would never hear me say a cruel word about his father, even when I had every reason to. But now you know. Now you see the real betrayal. It wasn't mine. It was hers. It always was. The last line struck like a bullet. You didn't exile me, Thaddeus. You exiled your own son to protect the lie your mother paid for in full. Eli dropped the letter. For a moment, he stood frozen, breath ragged. Then he stumbled back, falling onto the edge of his bed. His hands shook. His stomach twisted. It hadn't been a lone silence that kept the truth from him. It had been deliberate sabotage. A dynasty built on deception. A fortune protected by firewalls made of flesh and blood. His father, the man, now sleeping in some tower above the skyline, had spent 20 years building a fortress to keep pain out, never realizing the foundations had been rotted from the inside out. Across the city, Thaddeus stood in front of a mirror he hadn't looked into in days. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't slept. Since leaving Ellie's apartment, the only thing he could do was feel, and he was terrible at it. But something had begun to stir in him. Rage, yes, but deeper than that. A tremor of clarity. He pulled a dusty file box from the back of his walk-in closet. A folder labeled Ellsworth Private sat buried beneath old contracts and stock certificates. Inside was the report. He'd never reread it, never had reason to. He trusted it the way he trusted spreadsheets and balance sheets. Absolute. But tonight, he looked closer. The doctor's signature, the hospital stamp, and then, faint but present, an alteration mark. A transfer date logged a week before the test was supposedly conducted. The original file had been swapped. His blood chilled. She paid him off. His own mother. A flash of memory hit him. The night she looked him in the eye after the results. Some people weren't made to carry on. The Gideon legacy, perhaps it's for the best. He had thought she was trying to comfort him. She had been claiming victory. The next morning, Thaddeus didn't go to work, didn't shave, didn't check the markets. He called his lawyer. I want every detail on Dr. Ellsworth. Everything. Past, present, payments, patient logs, transfers. And I want it now. He ended the call, heart pounding with the venom of 20 years of misdirection. But beneath it all, deeper than the anger, something else began to pulse. Not vengeance, not shame. Grief. Because for the first time, Thaddeus saw what he had lost. Not just a son, not just the love of a woman who would have forgiven him, but the decades of a life that could have been lived differently. He whispered her name, alone, but she was gone, and the only piece of her left breathing was a boy named Eli, who had inherited not just her music, but her scars. The conference room on the 40th floor of Gideon Holdings had once been the site of some of Boston's most ruthless deals. Its walls were glass, its floor polished obsidian, and its silence absolute. But today, for the first time, Thaddeus Gideon sat at the head of the table, not as a predator, but as a man preparing to pull the skin off his own empire. 3 attorneys were seated across from him. All of them wore tailored suits and expressions carved from stone. Only one had been with the firm long enough to remember Alone's name. Open the records, Thaddeus said, voice low but heavy with steel. I want everything. Her will, the trust funds, any life insurance, any estate matters linked to the name Alone Marin Gideon or Alone Marin, and I want it now. There was a pause, a flicker of hesitation. Then papers rustled. The youngest attorney, a pale woman with ice blonde hair and a Harvard pedigree, slid a slim folder. Forward, sir, I have a copy of her public will. It was filed through a private estate lawyer 2 years ago when her diagnosis recurred. There is no mention of you or Kitty in Holdings. Thaddeus didn't blink, and the child, Eli Moran, her only named beneficiary, a silence fell between them like a dropped guillotine. She left him a modest trust, the woman continued, funded privately, no connection to your assets, company, or family holdings. No connection, Thaddeus repeated. She kept him completely outside the reach of my name. Yes, sir, another lawyer said, and with clear intent. He reached into the folder and handed over a scanned excerpt from the will. Handwritten, notarized. I do not name Eli Moran as heir to the Kittian estate. He is not bound to that legacy. He is not bound to its coldness, to its corruption, or to its expectations. He is my son, my miracle, my music. He needs nothing from the man who once claimed he couldn't exist. If one day the man chooses to see him not as a mistake, but as a mirror, then Eli may choose what to do with that truth himself. Thaddeus's throat burned as he read it. A strange, stifled pain twisted in his chest, a mix of admiration and shame. She had protected Eli to the very end. Even from him. She cut me out, he muttered. She never included you, the attorney corrected. That's different. Thaddeus sat back. He stared through the glass wall behind them down at the city skyline he had once believed he owned. He thought about the penthouse he lived in alone, the vaults of money untouched, the corporate tower bearing his name. He thought about Ellie's apartment, the music, the photos, the clutter, and the warmth that lived there. And the realization hit him. She didn't leave Eli out of your world because she hated you. She left him out because she knew it would break him. The lawyer across from him cleared his throat. Would you like to amend your current estate documents? If you wish to name Mr. Eli Moran, Thaddeus cut him off. No, not yet. The lawyers exchanged glances, sir. Thaddeus stood slowly, pressing his palms against the polished table. I'm not going to write him into a bloodline he never asked for. Not until I give him a reason to accept it. Not until I earn it. He turned to leave, but at the door, the blonde attorney called after him. Sir, there's something else. He stopped. There's a sealed file one your mother had locked in the personal vault at Kittian Manor. Marked confidential. It's listed under Alone Moran Kittian, custodial objection file. His blood chilled. Objection, we believe. It may have been prepared in the event she tried to pursue legal rights on behalf of a child against the family estate. Thaddeus's hands curled into fists. And did she? No, sir. The file was never activated, but she requested a formal dismissal of any claims. Quietly, 18 years ago, she waived everything. He swallowed hard. She signed away any claim to the Kittian name for his sake. Yes, sir. Thaddeus walked out, slower this time, the pressure behind his eyes building until it felt like the skyscraper might collapse on top of him. That night, he returned to Kittian Manor. He hadn't been there in over a decade. The estate was frozen in time, chandeliers dim, portraits lined with dust, a museum of mistakes and opulence. He moved through the halls like a ghost until he reached the private vault. Inside, locked file cabinets, old family documents, and tucked in the very back, a manila folder bound with a silk ribbon. He opened it, and there, written in neat legalese and bow, was a document signed by his mother, recommendation to initiate legal defense against unverified custodial claim. Subject, Alone Moran Kittian former spouse, claim pregnancy unsupported, by verified fertility assessment, possible paternity dispute anticipated, suggested settlement in exchange for NDA and permanent withdrawal. Child if born not to be acknowledged by Kittian Holdings without court order. Beneath it, her signature, cold, precise. There were notes in the margins, handwritten. If the boy is male, he may present future threat to succession. That was the truth. The legacy wasn't protected. It was rigged. Thaddeus staggered back. He clutched the cabinet like it was the only thing holding him upright. His mother had built an empire of silence around him, and he had enforced it. Blind and obedient. Now, it wasn't just guilt he felt. It was rage. He didn't just lose a son. He became the weapon used to drive him away, and there was only one person left to confront about it. The music filtered through the walls like a ghost. It was dusk now. the Boston skyline bleeding gold and indigo through tall windows. In the basement performance space of the Aurelian School of Music, students and staff filled every velvet seat, murmuring and shuffling in anticipation. The air hummed with warmth and excitement except in the last row, where Thaddeus Gideon sat in the shadows, his gloved hands folded tightly in his lap. He had called in no favors to secure a seat, no assistant, no limousine, no entourage, just him and the name listed third on the evening's program, Eli Morin, original composition. Winter remains. The curtain rose, and then he walked out. Eli stood beneath the white glow of the stage lights in a simple black shirt and slacks, his curls tousled, his posture nervous but composed. The baby grand piano gleamed before him like obsidian, a pool of still water waiting to be stirred. He adjusted the mic with one hand, and his voice cracked slightly as he spoke. This piece was written by my mother 19 years ago. She never had it performed. I adapted it for tonight. There was a pause. He blinked rapidly. She said she wrote it the day she left the house she'd once called home. A few in the audience nodded somberly, unaware that in the very back of the room, the man who had exiled her from that home sat frozen in his seat, breath shallow. Fingers white-knuckled on the armrest. Eli sat down and began to play. It started delicately soft chords that lingered like footsteps in snow, then a crescendo bitterness. Laced in harmony, the melody twisted, unresolved, haunting. There were pauses so pregnant with silence that Thaddeus's own heartbeat sounded like a drum in his ears. Then the climax hit, a furious, sweeping storm of notes, and finally a descent, like snowfall melting into earth. Grief and grace intertwined. By the end, Eli was trembling. So was Thaddeus. Applause erupted, and Eli stood, bowed quickly, and exited the stage as the next performer was introduced. Thaddeus rose quietly and slipped out of the theater, but he didn't leave. Instead, he walked the halls, winding past lockers and trophy cases. Tracing the sound of retreating footsteps, he found Eli sitting alone in the rehearsal wing on a worn bench near the vending machines. Head buried in his hands, his shoulders heaved once. Thaddeus stopped 5 feet away. His breath caught, and for the first time, he spoke. That piece was hers. Eli looked up, startled. Those eyes widened in recognition. The resemblance, the age, the impossible facts that must have been whispered by Lone all these years clicked into place. It wasn't disbelief in Ellie's face, it was rage. You, Eli said, voice low. You're him. Thaddeus nodded slowly. Yes. The air turned to ice between them. Eli stood, fire in his face now. You don't get to come here. You don't get to applaud from the shadows. You threw her out like garbage and left me with nothing. And now you want what? Applause for showing up? Forgiveness, closure. Thaddeus didn't flinch. I don't want forgiveness. Then why are you here? To see what I destroyed. The boy blinked. I told myself for years that I was right, that the child couldn't be mine, that I was sterile, but I wasn't. I was just afraid of something I couldn't control, a being, human. Ellie's jaw tightened. So this is guilt, a performance of your own? No, Thaddeus said, and his voice cracked, genuinely, for the first time in decades. This is surrender. I came to see you, not to claim you, not to fix anything, just to understand the cost. Eli turned away, walking to the edge of the hallway. He placed one hand on the cold glass window, watching snow begin to fall. After a long silence, he spoke. She died broke. You know that, right? But she never said one bad word about you. Not one. Even when she was coughing blood. She just said you were scared. I didn't understand what she meant. Now I do. Thaddeus looked down. Eli turned back to face him. You had all the money in the world, all the lawyers, all the power, and you still couldn't buy what she had. What was that? Thaddeus asked softly. Me. Thaddeus nodded once. No defense, no excuse, only truth. I don't want your name. Eli continued. I don't want your fortune. I'm not a Gideon. I never said you were. Thaddeus replied. You're a Morin, and that's the best thing you could be. Silence again. Then Eli stepped forward close enough that their shadows overlapped on the tile floor. If you're really here to understand the cost, he said, voice quieter now, then don't disappear. Stay long enough to feel it. I will. Thaddeus said, whatever it takes, and as the snow thickened outside, for the first time since Alone's death, father and son stood in the same frame, not as enemies, not yet as family, but as two fractured pieces of the same storm. The storm raged for 3 days. Boston lay buried beneath a curtain of white, its usual pulse dulled by nature's hush. Ice clung to window panes like veins across glass. In a modest brownstone apartment on the south end, the air was thick with silence, broken only by the hiss of the radiator and the rhythmic tapping of Ellie's pencil against a stack of music sheets. He hadn't spoken to Thaddeus since the night at the conservatory. Not because he didn't want to, because he didn't know what he wanted. The man wasn't just a stranger who had abandoned him. He was the ghost who had shaped every shadow in his life, and now he was here. A knock came at the door to raps. Patient but firm, Eli hesitated, then opened it to find Thaddeus, dressed down in a wool coat and scarf, holding a small metal box the color of tarnished gold. Not a gift-wrapped apology, not a bribe, a lockbox. Thaddeus's expression was unreadable. This belonged to your mother. It was sent to my legal office a week after her death. She instructed it not be opened unless I came to you. Eli stepped aside. They sat opposite each other in the dim kitchen, 2 mugs of untouched tea cooling between them. Thaddeus placed the box on the table. It clicked open. Inside was a single flash drive, a handwritten letter sealed in wax, and a yellowed photo of a much younger Thaddeus and alone in Central Park, their hands intertwined. Her laugh caught mid-motion. Eli broke the seal on the letter, unfolding it carefully. His mother's handwriting danced across the page in elegant loops, every stroke still alive. My darling Eli, if you're reading this, then he finally came. I asked myself for years whether Thaddeus would ever have the courage to face the truth, not just about you, but about himself. But if he is there, it means he chose to. I need you both to know something. Eli looked up, pulse accelerating. He continued reading aloud. The doctors told Thaddeus he was sterile. That was true for a time, but 3 months before I got pregnant, we had visited a private clinic in Zurich, a radical new procedure, risky and untested. But he was desperate. He told me afterward not to hope, that it was foolish, but I did. And then you happened. Eli blinked, stunned. Thaddeus sat still, the weight of 20 years pressing into his chest. I thought the surgery failed, he said. They said it had no measurable effect. I buried it. Eli kept reading. You were not a miracle. You were a choice, a fight, a defiance of odds. He refused to believe it because he was afraid of the responsibility, afraid of being vulnerable. But you were his, and more importantly, you were mine. There was a pause, a breath frozen between generations. Then Eli inserted the flash drive into his laptop. A video flickered to life. It was grainy, recorded from a hospital bed, alone. Frail, but still luminous, spoke directly into the lens. Eli, baby, I hope you're playing piano like I always imagined. And Thaddeus, she hesitated, her voice trembling. If you're watching this, then maybe, just maybe, you found your way back. She smiled, weak but radiant. You were never a monster, Thad, just a man terrified of being small in someone else's world. I forgave you a long time ago, not because you earned it, but because I wanted our son to grow without hate in his blood. The screen went black for a long time. Neither of them moved. Then Eli stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the silent city. His voice came quiet, but sure. She never hated you, he said, but I did, for a long time. Every broken violin string, every night we couldn't afford heat. I blamed the man in that photo. Thaddeus closed the box slowly. You were right to. Eli turned around, but now I see something else. Not a villain, not even a father. He paused, a man who destroyed everything and still showed up. Thaddeus rose. What does that mean? It means Eli exhaled. You don't get absolution, Thaddeus. That's not mine to give. But maybe you can earn presents. A knock came again, this time at Ellie's phone. A message from the conservatory, New York Philharmonic, requesting an audition. They saw the performance online. Thaddeus saw the screen. That's the biggest stage in the world. Eli nodded. And I'm going, he said, voice steady, alone. A beat passed. But if you're still in the audience when I walk off that stage, he added, eyes locking with his father's, maybe that's where the story begins. The end.